everybody. Uh, Wait a minute before everybody's joined. So I've got a few special announcements before we get into the questions. Um, there's a lot of consternation with the third week's resources, specifically with running the notebook, because I'm on a MacBook, and on Mac OS, there are certain assumptions with regard to what comes with Mac OS. It's better for developers because it comes with certain utilities that I assumed were on everybody's systems, but are not, in fact. And especially for people running Windows, it's a little bit difficult to run the notebook. So, for everybody who's having issues with this week's notebook, both in running the software, running a language model, even opening the notebook, and everything included, I thought I would preempt those questions with a small demonstration. So at the very top of the questions for the instructor forum, I made a new post. And this new post, if you click on it, it has a link at the bottom. And if you have a Google account, so first of all, as far as I'm aware, this will require a Google account. If you click on this link, it will open up this week's notebook and data in a Google Collaboratory environment. And Google Colab is like Jupyter Lab Desktop, except it runs on Google servers, and it comes with a GPU and everything all included. And so if you're having trouble at almost any point in the notebook, if you're finding you don't have access to wget, so you're unable to download the model, or if Llama CPP Python is not compiling, or you're getting an error in pretty much almost any cell, and there's a high chance that that's a result of your environment and certain assumptions that I made when producing the content, and perhaps presumptuous presumptions on what kind of environment you're running. So this is an excellent link to click on if you're having issues, because it is this week's content running on Google servers, where hopefully those problems are resolved. It is a little bit different as a result. In particular, the very beginning of the notebook now has extra steps for downloading the data. It'll import it into the Colab environment. But I thought also at the same time I'd give a short demonstration of what Colab is, because the video content, the video lectures will continue to be Jupyter Lab Desktop, but as I show Colab, you'll find that they are essentially the same platform. And also a quick word on the videos. I've re-recorded all lectures in weeks 3 and 4, and I've doubled them in length, and I've incorporated lots of feedback regarding how to use Jupyter Lab Desktop, more explanations of what exactly the notebooks are doing, why each cell is the way it is, and just rejigging up things a little bit to hopefully answer more questions that people might have. So regardless, so Colab is essentially the same as Jupyter Lab Desktop, and that's on purpose, because notebooks are produced by Jupyter. It's a company, it's a piece of software. The Jupyter Python notebook, IPython notebook, always look the same, and it's the same file. Like, so if you download the content from this week's module, so if you head over to week 3 and you click on the readings for this week, you'll find that there's like a link for downloading this week's course materials. The very same notebook that you would get by clicking on this link, I've loaded up in Google Colab. And Google Colab is fairly self-explanatory. I've set it up to automatically use the GPU. So if you see up here, it says there's a T4 enabled. And if you click connect, when you're logged into a Google account, it will start up Google Colab's backend environment. So it'll connect you to a machine with a CPU and a GPU, and it'll let you use it for, I think, 12 hours straight. And then once you start it up, you can just start clicking through everything. So here we just downloaded the data. If you go to the left-hand side and click on this little folder, you'll see files that are currently loaded up in the Colab environment. And here I've downloaded the data for this week's material. And then you can just continue clicking through everything to set up pip, LangChain, PyPDF, some people are running into issues with PyPDF. If you're running a non-American locale on your machine, PyPDF I don't think comes with good defaults for loading a PDF. Someone pointed that out in last week's office hours. This should resolve that again because I think it always defaults to an American locale. This is one problem with computing and internationalization. Most computing locales, so assumptions on the operating system's part regarding your time zone or your currency or your default system language. If you're Most people assume you're running an American locale, especially if you're into programming. Programmers tend to always use the American locale, even if they don't live in the States, just because developing kind of requires that everybody uses the same set of software. And if you're using a piece of software that might differ depending on where you live in the world, then that makes development and collaboration in development very difficult. So I developed, and I kind of assumed, I think, as a result of that, that everybody was using the American locale, which is a little bit ironic considering I'm not even American, I'm Canadian. But anyway, um, so regardless, so open up the notebook, and for those who have just newly joined, that is under this the questions for the instructor form. It's been pinned at the top, and yeah, you click on it, and there'll be a link to open up this week's notebook in Google Colab, which I'm demonstrating right now. And then you can continue to just go through it and click on everything, and you can see that PyPDF just successfully loaded up the files that I downloaded. So if I'm able to do it, you should be able to do it too if you're using this platform. This is assuming that you have a Google account, and for that I apologize because I think it's more realistic to transition to a platform like this than to go through the nitty-gritty of setting up Visual Studio on your computer or you know, mitigating problems with PyPDF and so on, or installing wget, which I think on Windows would require you to download something like Cygwin, which is a development platform that is many gigabytes large and takes a while to install. So if you're having issues with the notebook, once again, feel free to just open that up using the Colab link and go through this week's material like so. And just one final point, I guess, if you want to upload your own data, you can always drag and drop it into this environment on the side. So you can just drag and drop a file in there and it'll be inside the environment. So without further ado, I'm going to switch over to I'm going to switch into questions and answers. And the very first question, I guess, is from Ileana Murakami. Hi, I started running with the Colab and they got the problem running LLM Where's Tokyo and said it was disconnected. Okay, so let's go through this together. So I'm going to load up all the PDFs right now. Every time you work with a notebook, make sure you sequentially hit go on every single cell, and I can explain in real time actually what these are doing. Right now, we're loading up our PDFs and splitting them up into little documents. Those little documents are individually embedded and stored in the database. And when we ask the language model certain questions, the model will look at those little chunks. It'll figure out which document is most relevant and then read off from that document to answer your question. It does take a while for some of these cells to complete, but once you do, you should find that everything simply just works. So now that we've loaded our data, we'll now load the embedding model. I think my point in demonstrating this, Ileana, is really just that if LLM is not defined, then it's probably because you missed some step up until that point, because it's
What does
like a
that take
pyramid.
warning mean? What does that
Every
take warning?
single the warning is it's saying that LLM is not defined, and this is where we're defining LLM. So every cell that we run depends on every previous cell. It's like we're building a house of cards here, and so you should make sure that everything works up until that point. So that requires going through it like I am right now, clicking go on everything, pressing play, etc. So here we're installing ChromaDB, which is our vector database, which will store our documents. and everything that we load up is running in RAM. So if you close this tab and open the tab again, chances are your data will be gone. And it also only runs for about 12 hours. I don't think that's an issue. Yep, okay, so now we're inserting our documents into the vector store. That will also take a while. We can actually see what the system is doing if we click on resources up here. And it's done. We can run this query and we get back a document concerning art. So the James Street North art crawl, project description, et cetera, et cetera. So that's finished. This next step is a little bit tricky. So a number of people were running into issues with installing Llama CPP Python. Llama CPP Python is a piece of software for running language models on your machine. It is like a server of sorts. So it loads up the language model file. It makes it available for the rest of the program to ask questions of the AI and receive back answers. And so this piece of software, the way to install it is very different depending on what kind of machine you're on. So if you're on a Windows machine, you need a compiler essentially to compile the software from scratch. If you're on an Apple machine, you also need a compiler, but you need a different kind of compiler. You need Xcode, not Visual Studio, and also the way to accelerate the language model on the MacBook requires almost completely different commands than if you're on Windows, and if you're on Linux, then it's also another completely different set of instructions. And so we're dealing with 3 different platforms, and this particular step differs depending on all 3. So really, it's easiest if we just use Collab here, which is what I'm doing. So it's building the piece of software. We just wait a second. A few more things to keep in mind here. You can copy and paste this notebook, insert it into your own Google Drive, and make it your own. Right now, it's set up that if you close the tab and reopen it, it won't save the output. But if you want to change that in your own version of the notebook, you head up to Edit and then Notebook Settings. And then the notebook settings it's a very important panel in Google Collaboratory. In particular, you can change the runtime type from Python to R, which I know some students have used before for data analysis. And you can change the hardware accelerator. And I changed it from the CPU to the T4. And the T4 is an NVIDIA GPU. It's a graphics card. It accelerates the language model. It makes it many times faster than if you're just running it on the GPU. But if you want to disable the option to clear all command output, when you close the tab, you make sure that this little box is unchecked. And then you click go. Okay, so that's installed. We're now going to download the language model, and this should be really quick. Wow, that is fast. It's really fast, much faster than I expected. How fast is that? 250 times. That's 2 gigabits. Okay. That is, wow, I'm impressed. I guess it's all residing on the same server. Anyway, so we're downloading Mistral. It's going to dump the file right here. This .gguf file is where the language model lives. And then we're going to load it up. So let's see if we can do that. And once again, I'm clicking go, 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 go on every single code cell, which is these little boxes. And clicking them sequentially every single time is what's necessary. So we've loaded it up, and then we can press go. And it already responded. It's telling us that it's located on the eastern coast of Honshu. So yeah, and then you can make a new cell. So if you go between cells, you can click a little button to make a new cell. And if you wanted to ask a different question, you can copy and paste that from the previous cell and write something like, where is Canada? And then type go. And Canada is located in the continent of North America, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you do the exact same thing for the next couple of cells. And if you want to use your own data, you can rerun some of these cells and it will keep later cells loaded all the same. So for example, if you didn't want to do the Supreme Court opinions from opinion slips from 2014, you could instead drag and drop in a different folder with different PDFs. And whoops. And you can go up to the cell, which loaded up many PDFs, and you just change the directory to the new directory, and you click go again, and then go again. And then you go down here to where we inserted into the database, and you click go one more time. So then you've loaded up more data, you've loaded up potentially like a whole directory full of PDFs from, say, like a project you're working on or something. And when you load the agent, it'll be able to answer your questions. So for those who have been running into issues with Jupyter Lab Desktop, I apologize for that. I made a couple of assumptions regarding your environment, and I'm hoping, praying really, that this resolves those issues. Right. Okay. So if you have a question, feel free to ask right now, and I'll just be here. I drink some water, and if not, then I'll just ramble about something. I also mentioned at the beginning of the call that I've re-recorded all lecture material for week 3 and 4. I've doubled it in length. I had a directive when I was making this course. I'm not wondering if I hallucinated it, but I thought somebody told me that all videos should be 15 minutes long because uh, it's typically working people who take this course, and we don't want it to have too much content. But for something as complicated as this material, I think that made me implicitly skip certain steps that I consider elementary, but that's me, of course. And so I go deeper into what Jupyter Lab Desktop is, how to run it, how to make use of it now in the new videos. So I think they went live late Monday. So if you watch the videos early Monday, you can go back and look at them again, and there should be new content. I've also updated the notebooks to include more comments, and you're looking at one version of that right now in the Colab notebook. Right. So other things to keep in mind when using Google Colaboratory, of course, it's running on Google servers, so don't upload anything too confidential or too sensitive, especially if you are interested in using an agent to do research with your current content. And that's because it's Google servers, obviously. I doubt they use what you upload for training their own models, but you never know. And if security is an issue for you, I think there are also other notebook hosts. I think you can run them on Microsoft servers. And I think you can also run them on something called Paperless, maybe? I'm beginning to forget the name. I think they were acquired by DigitalOcean recently, so they might not be an option anymore. But so Leon has a second question. The disconnection keeps happening. CUDA driver version is insufficient for CUDA runtime version. Oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting error. What I would do is restart the collab a couple of times and hope that you get a GPU that has firmware fit for Llama CPP Python, because it worked out of the box for me, but it's possible that Google gave you a different GPU and the newer GPU might be not compatible for some reason, which I would be very surprised by, but regardless, actually I can just show you how to do that even. Right, so in Google Colab, if you want to restart the environment, you go up here and you click Manage Sessions, but you can also click on Disconnect and Delete Runtime. And if you do this, it will delete the files that you upload, just to be really clear. So keep your files handy. If you want to, for example, download what you've done and keep a copy of it, you can go to File and you can click under Download download it as either of these. But you can also save a copy as a GitHub gist, which I think keeps it as oops, this is going to want me to log into GitHub, but essentially you can download what you've done as a Python notebook and keep those files on command. And JupyterLab Desktop is nice because you can also output the notebook as an HTML file to show other people. So it's a bit like a data diary. So if you want to do data journalism work and you want to make sure that your work is reproducible, uh, I think the colloquial term is data diary, and you can download such a data diary with JupyterLab Desktop. So what you can do is download as a HiPy notebook, IPYNB, open it up in JupyterLab Desktop, and then download it from JupyterLab Desktop as an HTML file. Rohit Saran says, did I hear you say you've explained the basics of initiating JupyterLab Desktop in a new video? Yes. Module 3, video 3, now goes through how to open up a notebook in JupyterLab Desktop. So it's a simple matter of dragging and dropping the file into JupyterLab Desktop, but I think that's a very simple step one that, as someone very correctly pointed out in the questions forum, I simply forgot to mention. So Leon is giving us an update. I got a message before that I needed to change from GPU to another environment. Oh, if that's the case, yes, you should make sure it's set to T4. And the way to do that is you go up to runtime, change runtime type. Always make sure that T4 GPU is selected here. Okay, so I'm going to look at the chat now. From Sam Gross, do you know of any libraries or resources where people share generative AI projects / templates? For journalists specifically, Hacks Hackers, I think, has a Hugging Face directory where we're listing interesting generative AI projects. I can link that out to everybody later, but also Nick Diakopoulos has a good blog, Generative AI in the Newsroom. That I think also demonstrates projects, but where you can build off of and download it as an existing project, I'm not sure of, so I'm gonna have to look into that for you. I'm gonna make a note for that. Okay. Okay. So next question, Natalie. Yeah. Is it too small right now, actually? I can zoom in a little bit. Okay. I also apologize if there's an issue with the connection because I'm in Europe right now. So if this is going transatlantic, then I apologize, and there might be some kind of problem with the bitrate there. So a few more points then. We're going to be talking to Freddie Bolton next week. He's an engineer at Hugging Face. He works together at Hugging Face with someone called Brigitte Toussignon, who is a Canadian researcher who's done, I think, a thesis project on AI and journalism. So I think he'll have interesting points with regard to Hugging Face and generative AI projects and journalists in particular. So I'll be asking him about that in particular. And yeah, there's a little bit of a gap with regard to generative AI technologies in the sense that uh, you have a crop of companies that do very good implementations of this technology. So that's OpenAI, that's Anthropic, that's Google. Excellent, excellent implementations. And then you have the raw stuff that the open source community puts out. So tools like the ones that I'm showing you are generally built by individuals who have a lot of free time on their hands. And they are computer geeks, right? Really, they spend all their time developing the stuff. They exchange utilities, they make models, they share this stuff on Hugging Face. But there's an interesting gap in the middle where quite a number of the interesting utilities that do get produced by the open source community don't become as usable as the best in class tools coming from OpenAI and Google are. And you do have people like Simon Wilson, for example. I mean, his blog, first of all, is amazing, and he's in the class, which I'm like wow, he's in my course. But I think even stuff like dataset and LLM are a little bit too complicated for many working journalists in the sense that they assume you're able to open up the terminal or the command line and be able to run certain commands, and not everybody can do that. And so quite a bit of this tech remains out of reach insofar as usability and uh, ease of use. And well, actually, that's kind of embarrassing. I think my environment just crashed and restarted live in the video feed. Um, I wasn't even touching the keyboard. So anyway, there's a bit of a usability gap right now between the cutting edge technology and usability. And what that means is that there aren't very many resources for people to go to if they want to learn how to use this stuff for themselves. And moreover, there aren't very many examples for what to do with this technology, even if you are able to use it. So in this course, I'm doing a very basic, you can talk to an AI and ask a question about a bunch of PDFs. We have not really moved beyond that, which is a little bit problematic because I think honestly the tools aren't there yet. And this course in a way is a demonstration of that, because even to get this very basic use case up and running is requiring quite a bit of lifting, as it turns out, on my end to properly communicate what's happening. I think there was also, but anyway, so running it in a collaboratory environment like this lets you use the state-of-the-art generative AI technologies, but they also assume that you know how to do things in Python. They assume that even know what Google Colab is, because it's not a super well-known technology. But I do appreciate that the Knight Center approached me about this class, because I think there is utility in opening up a space to discuss these sorts of ideas. Just the mere fact that there is such a gap between the open source community and major companies, their tools and products, I think is a little bit of a realization that I'm having in preparing the materials for this class, because there is no convenient website for me to go to where you can just dump in a bunch of PDFs and ask a question about the PDFs. Like that doesn't necessarily exist, which is why not? I mean, ChatGPT came out a year ago, and in many ways, we've really seriously had many leaps and advances in the state of the art, but we haven't really gone very far in actually using these things. So generative AI technologies are really, I think, for the most part, are in you know, a research phase right now. So I'm going to go back to the chat to read more questions. I got there was another link that was broken. Oh no. Thank you, Philippa, for figuring that out. Also, is there a John Keefe video for this course? There will be, I promise you that. We're finally having the interview on Friday. And so we'll be having a double hitter next week with Freddie Bolton and John Keefe. They're both going to be talking about data science and journalism. I apologize for that slipping. It's really a matter of, I think, John's timetable more than anything. But I appreciate him continuing to keep me updated on when exactly we can have an interview. So we've updated a link on Cicero. So thank you very much, Felipa. And Ileana Mercami, once again, it took a long time to answer, over a minute. Right. Okay. So there is uh um there is an issue with the model sometimes, and I have no idea why, but half the time when you press go on the agent, it's able to answer the question, and half the time it derails itself and is unable to answer the question. And I'm gonna have to look into ways to prevent that from happening. Personally, I've had success in using the agent, but some people have been commenting saying that once they use the agent, it either begins to talk in circles, or it misses the point, or what have you. That's partially a result of the software not fully being fleshed out, but I think that there's a way around it. And I think for the fourth week, we'll have a solution for that agent problem. But thank you for bringing that up, Ileana. From Mike Johnson, apologies if that's not how you say it. I don't want to derail things too much, but I'm curious to know more about what you did to apply AI to CBC content, with the publication, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, so my undergraduate thesis from, like, I don't know, 4 years ago now, it was just when GPT-2 came out and COVID was hitting. And GPT-2 was trained before COVID. Uh, and so it didn't know anything about COVID. It didn't know how the news organizations were responding to COVID, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I wanted to know whether GPT could predict how CBC in particular would predict how whether I wanted to know whether GPT-2 could predict CBC's coverage of COVID. And so it knows a lot about CBC. It knows typically how CBC articles are written. It's able to write CBC copy, but it doesn't know anything about COVID because COVID happened after the model had come out. And so I got the model to produce, I gave the model about 5,000 CBC headlines about COVID, and then it wrote articles for every single headline. And then I compared the two, like a set of real articles about COVID and a set of synthetic articles produced by GPT. And I found that GPT was fairly able to predict how CBC would handle COVID. But at some point, CBC actually, I think their editorial team decided to stop being so positive about COVID, to stop being so negative about COVID in around March of 2020. And GPT didn't predict that at all. So regardless, uh, I think my point is that GPT-2 was trained uh, on like a lot of content. And OpenAI, back when they were more open, they actually came out with a really neat web page showing where their content came from. So what content went into GPT-2 to train the model. And I discovered that if you look at the top 100, uh, fully half of them are from news organizations. So the success of GPT-2, which was really the first really like creative large language model, a lot of it came from news organizations. And in particular, I saw that CBC was the 21st most common data source. And so I thought, maybe it's good at writing CBC content. And lo and behold, it was. It was very good at writing CBC content. But I didn't know anything about COVID. So the idea was to see whether GPT-2 could predict CBC's handling regardless. Um, so I found that around the times the lockdowns happened, CBC, and this goes for almost every single country in the world except the United States, CBC became very positive in their reporting. They were suddenly like very cheerful. They had a lot of puff pieces talking to specific individuals about how they're handling the pandemic really well and everything's hunky dory and okay. And they became really positive, which is quite a shift from January 2020 to March 2020, when they were very, very like morose and kind of depressing in their coverage. Because I mean, we were scared, right? It was spreading from China to uh, Hong Kong to, I guess, Italy to, the States. And people were freaking out with the spread of COVID early on, back when we were calling it the novel coronavirus. And in almost every single country, when lockdowns happened, coverage, generally speaking, became very positive. And in political communications, this is called the rally around the flag approach. And so I use GPT to really like explore that. There's a paper out, I think, on ACL on their anthology. Anyway, going past that, if you have more questions, feel free to direct message me on the platform as well. So from Gabriella, if it's possible to find a function, maybe from LangChain, that helps run the week 3 large language model to scan the pattern of information from an archive of PDFs. So specifically what it means to scan the pattern of information, I don't know. But there is a function for loading a bunch of PDFs, and that's probably the first step. What you can do once you have, so if you look at the many, this is going to involve some programming live, but basically this many PDFs function is actually like a series of documents. Series of documents like this. And what you can do, if you know how to use Python, is, let's see if the model is still loaded. Yep, it's still loaded. So what you can do is for document in many PDFs, so for every single document that's inside many PDFs, you can actually ask the language model something like, tell me about this, like, does this document, we can do it like this. For document, page content. Does this document concern telephones? And it will give every single document in that folder to the language model. And for every single document, it will ask, oh, it's not printing it, right? It'll ask the same question, which is like, does this document concern telephones? And what this piece of code means is it's passing literally like the text into the prompt, and then it asks the question. And here we're getting our very interesting responses, which is just no over and over again, which is it does not concern telephones, which if you spruce this up, this could actually be pretty interesting. So instead of does this document concern telephones, it might be like first summarize the document, then answer this question. And we can run it again. So it'll go through every single document and ask the exact same question over and over again. And then you just go through the responses and you can copy and paste the response every single time. This, generally speaking, is I think the second most useful tool that you can do with language models. It's not running because I think I set the limit too low, sample tokens too low. But anyway, annotation and metadata production is probably the second most useful tool language models can achieve, or the second most useful use case that language models can achieve. And I use that person in my research. So if I have, for example, 100,000 pages, and I want to figure out if every single page is about a certain topic or not, or I want to know what the topic of the so describe the topic of this document in a single word. And it'll go through every single document, and it should hopefully give me a single word every single time. I can collect those words that it generates after this process is finished. And here it's law. Very interesting. You can collect those and then rule. Okay. Interesting. I think these make sense considering it's documents I've taken from the Supreme Court. So you can go through these words that it's generated afterwards and try to figure out if there's like how many times this jury selection pop up, how many times this rule pop up, and then you can get a sense of the rough distribution of topics across, say, like 100,000 pages. So here we'll probably find that evidence and rule come up quite a few times. So we could say that of all of those opinions that the Supreme Court issued in 2014, maybe like 20% concern, maybe like if you split up every single document into like 10 chunks, 20% of those chunks concern evidence, or 10% of those chunks concern rule, or whatever. And the rule chunks they often in these documents just describe precedents. So that would make sense. So that this is one way to use it. And if the agent stuff you're not finding interesting, I think I might do some extra material for next week that goes into alternative ways to make use of the language model. Not only the agent, but just how to load up documents and ask questions about those documents like I am here. Thank you, Gabriella. That's actually a great question. So thank you very much. And then Lisa, seems knowing Python would help with understanding and working these environments. Yes, it would. Do you have a recommendation for a basic Python programming learning resource? Yes. So I think W3 Schools has a Python crash course, Python tutorial. Yeah. Okay. So this is a decent introduction. So W3 Schools is an old website. They historically have been a place to go for learning about HTML and CSS, but they've added on tutorials for Python, and it even lets you run that code in the browser. So in particular, if you want to learn like the most useful parts of Python or in the context of this class is probably what I did here, which is for. So if you go through this, there's a page on for loops. A for loop is used for iterating over a sequence. So in my example, I had a whole bunch of documents. It looks at every single document and it makes that document available. And then you can pass that document off to the language model in just like so. And it might be helpful to take a screenshot of this right now, just so you can replicate what I've done. Rather than have to reverse engineer it yourself based off the W3 Schools tutorial, but I will send that out regardless. I don't think this print thing is even necessary actually, so let's just run this without it. So it'll be asking the exact same question again as it goes through. Yeah, so it says law right here. And that's a bit of a pain to extract. In particular, I think we should figure out a way to hide this, but I can do that for next week. All right. So language models, in my honest opinion, they're most useful when you're dealing with a whole bunch of documents and you want to condense those documents down in some way. The idea behind an agent is that the agent figures out its own method for condensing those documents, but you could do it manually, just as I have here. So I'll exit that environment for now. So once again, if you've just joined, and if you did join just a moment ago, I've re-uploaded all of the lecture material for this class for weeks 3 and 4. So those are new material. I've doubled them in length. I've also included a link, and that should be going out in an email just momentarily to this collaboratory space, so you can run the code for this week in a Google environment versus your own computer, because running it on your own computer has invited too much trouble. And I apologize for that, first of all, because it's really a result of certain assumptions that I made on the part of your environment. But with that aside, please be sure to look at all the videos. Please be sure to participate in the discussion forums. Please be sure to read the readings, etc., etc., etc. And just today and yesterday, I avoided answering certain questions regarding their environment because I don't think that was really solvable. And this collaboratory thing should solve a whole bunch of people's problems all in one manner. But if you do have questions regarding the collaboratory space, please feel free to post them in the questions for the audience, questions for the instructor forum, and we'll take a look at it as the week goes on. So with that, oh, one last question from Gabriella. Will you still be sharing notebooks that we run on Jupyter? Yes, I will still be sharing notebooks that run on Jupyter, but I'll also be sharing a link to Collaboratory. And with that, be sure to take a look at the new lectures, be sure to take a look at the Collaboratory space, and I'll be sharing a couple hopefully useful functions for looking at documents with language models next week. Thank you very much, everybody, and I hope you have a nice week. Bye-bye.